Well, good morning. It's Monday, 10 o'clock, 7th of July, and welcome to our live stream this morning. We're going to talk about trans inclusion, and it seems a bit a kind of old hat now. We've talked about trans inclusion and the Supreme Court ruling since the 16th of April, so that's coming, 10, 12 weeks ago. And yes, we're still talking about it because day in, day out, it's not getting any better, not getting any easier. In fact, if anything, the clarity we were promised has become less clear, more murky. And we're already seeing lots of different people with different perspectives talking about this in the media, online. And we're finding that organisations across the UK are finding it really difficult to navigate this, where it would appear it's clear, but often it isn't. So I invite you to join in. I can see that we're on YouTube. I can see that we're on Facebook. I can't see the stream on LinkedIn as yet, which means if you are watching this on LinkedIn, you won't know that, but it will be on there later. So I don't know why we're not on LinkedIn at the moment, but it doesn't seem to be connected on LinkedIn. So shame about that, but we'll have to go with that. So do join us on Riverside, join us on Facebook, or join us on YouTube right now. So it's my absolute pleasure to bring on a great friend and colleague, Jacqui Gavin. And I've known Jacqui for many, many years, and she was a very early friend, confidant, and mentor to me back in the back in the 2019s, 2018s. I've known her for 10 years or so. And Jacqui, hello, good morning. Who are you? For those of people who don't know you.
So, good morning, Joanne, and forgive the sound of my voice this morning. It doesn't normally sound like this. I have a dose of laryngitis at the moment, so forgive me for that, first of all. So, it's great to be here. Great to be a part of this conversation. And yes, as you say, Joanne, we've known each other for a long, long while, and it's great to be a part of this conversation. So, in terms of who I am, who am I? I have been a long-term advocate, activist, call it what you will, in terms of trans inclusion for nearly 40 years. I suppose what people will probably know me more famous for is the role that I played in the civil service for a long time, where I was the chair of the Cross Civil Service Network, Agender, which worked on how we actually improved the process and the way we saw things in terms of trans as an umbrella term, originally as transsexual, to use that word. But how do we absolutely embed things across the wider civil service to make sure that policies, processes, guidance, anything around that was about the kind of things that we do? But since then, I've moved on to different things, as you can tell by the business name underneath my title these days. I no longer work for the public sector. I'm an independent consultant working in diversity, equity, and inclusion, trying to move the dial forward in terms of how we really, really rebalance and how do we reset the pendulum of the right to the left movement using our five senses to try and get into that space.
Excellent. So you are a multi-generational inclusion specialist. I think we probably call that. And a
That's
lifetime
about right.
achiever. You've been nominated for a lifetime achievement award for the National Diversity Awards. I mean, another award that's been honoured. I mean, the one behind your head is probably the ultimate accolade you've received, isn't it? The BEM.
It is. I mean, I'm an incredibly proud of individual, and anytime I get acknowledged or anytime somebody puts me forward for something, when you read these things, and it's the same with a British Empire medal, which I'm incredibly proud of. I've also got my partner's OBE here as well. But, excuse me, when you read these things, it's incredibly humbling. And it was the same for, as you say, being nominated for a Lifetime Achiever Award. Apart from making you feel very, very old, it's incredibly humbling to read those things that make you feel that you've done something that has been worthwhile. But I never ever do these things about getting an award or honor or whatever you want to call it. It's about doing the right thing for our people of today.
Yeah, and that's all we ever want, really, as inclusion specialists, is try to balance those conflicting needs and priorities, because we often try and pit one identity against another identity, and that's what seems to have got us into this mess, as some people might say. That we're trying to say my rights are more important than your rights. That is not what I or you or many others are trying to work on here.
I think you're absolutely right, Joe. I think for me, I talk about, excuse me, I talk about the pendulum being swung from the left to the right. I think at the moment we have to acknowledge that our world is very, very polarized, and the way we can go beyond that is incredibly important, particularly given the recent things that we've seen, the ruling, etc., etc. We have to acknowledge that it's not helpful when we continually push our pendulum to the left and expect the pendulum of the opposition, as it were, to be continually pushed to the right. We need to find a way to navigate through this. Working in the civil service, I was always about diplomacy. You may not have always agreed with a minister or a senior member of the civil service, but you had to navigate it in a way that was diplomatic and respectful to allow us to be able to do the kind of things that we need to do.
So I've started using the term transsexual because that really, I mean, that was a word that we as I say we, the community, moved away from over the last 5-10 years, to move from the idea that it's a below the waist activity, rather than transgender is above the neck activity, if you like, and trying to make sure that we framed it in that way. But what's happened, and I'm told, I'm not trying to say this is the absolute, is that that's created a lot of confusion in people as to who are we? We started off trans being a very narrow definition, and then we went to what I would call an umbrella term. And I always describe this as like a brolly, a fold-up brolly you keep in your handbag. And now we're like a golf umbrella. A golf umbrella, it covers so much, from identity to expression to other aspects of gender and social construct. Is that where some of the confusions lie? Who are trans people?
I think it's a large part of it. Let's not kid ourselves. When we were, as somebody who was involved in very much the way that we've got the legislation that we had in terms of the gender reassignment regs of the Sex Discrimination Act, which were updated in 1999, then of course the Gender Recognition Act, the Equality Act, and so many things. The very much when we wrote the ruling around that and the protections around that, that was very much based on gender reassignment, i.e. what you define as transsexualism, Joe. And I think where we've got to is that, yes, there's been a huge influx of newer identities, newer expressions, etc., etc. They've always been there. They've never ever not been there. But I think we then try to push them all under one umbrella, and it's got a little bit crowded, a little bit confused. People don't know what it means, and how do we actually define it? And we have to recognize that there is so many different things in this space that when you create the legislation, I don't understand yet. I still don't get it. What does this actually mean? And I think it's important for us to be able to really, really start to explain that.
Yeah. So you were involved in the civil service, you know, way back in time. It's sort of Scooby Doo moment, isn't it? We sort of did that sort of, we have to record it. You hit the headlines. It's not a secret. You're on front page of the Sun, the Mirror, not on page 3, but on page 1. You were the butcher who married somebody in a far-flung place, and you were on the headlines for all the wrong reasons. That was a pretty tough time for you, wasn't it? In those days, being trans, being transsexual, being anything other than normal was a real shock horror story.
It was, and I mean, yes, when I got married to my ex-husband Steve, we were the front page news. In fact, I know that I was probably a headline, probably about 5-6 years before that, if not longer, when I was actually doing modeling for the then Burton Group, Clarins Cosmetics, these kind of organizations. And then when we arrived back, after thinking we could get a legal marriage in the lovely island of Barbados, we were met by a barrage of flashbulbs, is the best way I could describe it, at Gatwick Airport, and a series of headlines in the following day's papers that read, as you said, sex swap butcher pies the knot, op removes his sausage, amongst other headlines. And it was never ever easy. I mean, we never went out to catch a headline. We went out to just exist and get on and live in society like everybody else. It was never ever about trying to be out. It was just about trying to exist. But of course, the media, being the media what they are, sadly found a way to try and make a series of sales, so to speak.
So that was way before any of the legislation. So way before marriage equality, even civil partnerships, way before. Was it before the Sex Discrimination Act? It was around that. That was the mid-70s, wasn't it?
It was before the sex. Sorry, it was after the sex discrimination, but it was before the gender reassignment regs were updated in the Sex Discrimination Act.
Yeah. And so you were living in a world where we had previous court cases. Was that Ashley and
Say in 1970, Corbett versus
where her
Corbett.
marriage was annulled for political reasons to avoid her inheriting a peerage or something? I think something along those lines.
Yeah.
So before then, nobody really cared, did they? But suddenly, some people started caring because they realised there was this paradox being created by people transitioning and having surgery. And until that point, really, you could just change your birth certificate. I hear of stories, Greece at 1970s, where people just had an operation and got their birth certificate reissued. No big deal at all.
No questions. Absolutely. I mean, as you say, before the Corbett versus Corbett case, but because I think the best way to describe it, April was looking to, with her marriage at that time, it was going to be in, let's just call it regal circumstances and surroundings. And because of that, that's where suddenly there was this kind of, oh, what? How are we going to stop this? We've got to find a way to put a barrier into this space. And it wasn't till 1997, 99, when the Goodwin case happened, that allowed us to be able to do. But up to that point, there was so many different cases, including probably one that many people know about is the Caroline Cossey, where in 1990 she went to the European Court of Human Rights to try and allow her to get married and her marriage recognised. But unfortunately, in 1990, she just couldn't make it. At that time, there was 12 Supreme Court's judges in the European Court of Human Rights, and she only lost it by 2 votes. But it was the momentum we needed to really, really start to build things from there.
As we've seen recently, you need to lose a case in order to win the next one. And
Absolutely.
unfortunately, in April, that was the case that trans people. And people say we didn't lose. The law was clarified, but it doesn't feel like a neutral outcome for anybody who's trans. It feels like we have lost, and it's been weaponized. You were involved, you say, in the civil service around the time when the Gender Recognition Act and the Equality Act were being drafted, and you were around the people who were discussing the legislation as it was coming in.
Yeah.
Was there a lack of clarity at that time?
I don't think there's a lack of clarity. I think the legislation was very specifically built around transsexualism or gender reassignment. Hence the reason why it's the Gender Recognition Act. Same as the Equality Act, it's the Gender Reassignment Regulation. So it was very much built around individuals, as the legislation spells out, individuals going from A to Z, as I call it, or from Z to A, i.e., going from male to female or female to male. I think what's happened since then, we've then seen this increase, as I said before, about of more identities, more expressions coming to the fore, and people thinking that we can just push it all under that umbrella. Going back to your golf umbrella analogy, Joe, and suddenly everybody feeling that they have to have that place under that umbrella, and that's where like a little bit of the pushback has come, and there has been pushback on that. But during the time, going back to your point around, was there any misunderstanding in the civil service at that time? No, because it was very much built around, as I say, the journey from A to Z or from Z to A.
And what you're saying now is that there's a bus stop at B, C, D, E, F, and you can hang on at G if you want without getting to Z. And there's no,
Absolutely.
and that's where the confusion, that's where the lack of clarity is because there's no expectation of getting to Z or back to A.
Yeah, I think that's where, as I say, allowing people to do those kind of bus stops has caused the confusion. For me, at that time, did we expect that? No. I suppose there was a minority, and I mean a minority of cases where people went, well, what about me? And the only way we could get the legislation through was to allow for people to understand, look, there are people who absolutely, categorically feel that they are born in the wrong body. So therefore, it was very much based on that concept that I was born as male, but I feel more like a female. So that was built on that kind of process, same as those individuals born female, feeling that they have more of a sense that they are more male. Never about, I don't want to, I just want to wear clothes, or I just want to express myself, or whatever. It was never built around that.
Hence why the Supreme Court acquiesced around this, the decision they made, because it wasn't clear and there was too many bus stops, is what we're saying.
I think so. I think that's basically what's happened. We've seen more and more people who, based on expression, feeling that they have the right to be in, as what was it the court said, safe spaces, or call it what you will. And that's where a little bit of the confusions come. And I think, personally speaking, I think we went too quickly, too soon, without actually bringing people with us. And I think that's part of what we've got to do, is win the trust, which could be a long battle and a difficult battle.
I mean, one of the things the judge who was reading out the ruling and the verdict was, he said you can have this kind of paradox where you have I think he used the word a trans woman with a gender recognition certificate who looks male, and that isn't what the act was intended to have. And I interpret his words to be and looks male to be has a penis, for want of a better way of putting it, or visibly other signs of being male. But the act is very clear that you don't need to have had surgery or be planning on surgery in order for gender recognition. So how do we marry that looks male? Because if you do a public perception, public survey, if you say, do you want trans people in women's toilets? The answer is no, predominantly. The majority is. If you said, do you mind transsexual people who've had an operation in a women's toilet? Most people will probably go, that's probably okay. So it's around whether we like it or not, as a community or communities or collection of people, the public perception that we need to win over is trying to identify back from the golf umbrella to a definition that the public perception can get behind, because that's where we are now, where we've lost the will of the people behind us. We're now seen as too complicated, too complex, demanding too much. And I'm not saying the danger is within our own communities, we'll be seen as throwing people under a bus and trying to be elitist and saying, oh, there's trans medicalism and hang on a minute, hang on a minute, hang on a minute. What about me? What about me? As you say. And there's going to be a lot of people who are happy or unhappy. Right now, we're all unhappy. And it's not fair that some of us become less unhappy and some of us become more unhappy. How do we rationalize that?
I mean, going back to your point about looking, I mean, how do we define what a female looks like? How do we define, well, particularly what a female looks like? Not everybody can undergo facial feminization surgery. Not everybody goes through all those different kind of things that they choose that they may want to go through. And not everybody can afford those kind of luxuries, as it were. We've got to remember that this is not just about trying to find a way to be able to look female. It's about living with ourselves and being honest with ourselves as much as anything else. I think the challenge that we've got is that if there is somebody who, for better tone of a phrase, and forgive me being clumsy with the language, but is going into a female toilet but has full facial hair, full everything on that kind of context, that's going to drive people into sort of that kind of, what's going on here? Why are they in this space? This is my space. Now, the fact that they have facial hair shouldn't matter, but it's that construct of suddenly I'm frightened and I feel that you do not belong here because of the way you look. When I went through my gender transition all these years ago, it was always about trying to fit in as best you could. Yes, in the early days, you did have the 5 o'clock shadow. There was nothing you could do about that 5 o'clock shadow. But don't cis females also sometimes have a 5 o'clock shadow as part of the aging process? So we have to be realistic about it. But I think it's all of those kind of things that happened in the media before when and I still remember the sundown, how to spot a trans person, look for the 5 o'clock shadow, look for the size of the hands, look for the size of the feet, all of those kind of things. So are we now saying that people are going to go into toilets and suddenly look, oh, she's got size 8s, it looks like she's got big feet, or she's got big hands? Who are we to make any judgments on all of those kind of things? And I think we've got to try and silence that kind of voice as well.
Yeah, but that doesn't serve femininity or anybody well if we're judging people on how they look. And I've got many cis female friends who are well over 6 foot. They play rugby. They scare me, and they're often being called out or looked at strangely because they are just large women. And I can't remember the character's name on Game of Thrones. The large, tall, blonde lady,
Yes.
very striking. So I think it comes down to the bell curve of normality, if you like, isn't it? Where t statistically, women are shorter than men. But that doesn't mean to say there aren't people on the outlying quartiles, percentiles of that bell curve as well. So it's recognizing that people are different. I've got many black female friends who often get misgendered because of their voice. And we're using a white British definition of what normality looks like. And we see this again in sport and other locations where beauty standards are relative to the culture in which you grow up in. And there are people out there who don't look female attractive to men in the UK because they are not white British. And I think we've got to look at how we judge people on how they look and their appearance. Because that's not just trans people; it's all people are being judged on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, again, if we go back to using the sport analogy, Joe, I mean, during obviously the Olympics of last year, what we saw with that boxer, that was a huge thing in terms of that. We've seen it with Leah Thomas, the swimmer, who's just obviously lost all of her recognition that she has had over recent years because of the way somebody looks or the way somebody presents.
Or the camera angle that's used, or the comparator that's used. And I did an interview on GB News recently about Imane Khalif, and they were showing Imane winning the boxing match for the medal. They said, "Does that look fair to you?" I said, "Well, show me the previous round where the person who lost in the final beat their opponent. What you showed me here is a boxer beating a boxer. Therefore, the boxer who wins is going to look like they've won. The boxer who loses looks like they're going to lose. So show me the previous round where the other person beat the other person. Tell me how they look." So the media is very good at picking and choosing the imagery, scenarios, and the Leah Thomas is a classic example of showing the one or two things she won, not the hundreds of things she lost. And we see that sort of the availability bias, the confirmation bias, all those things are kicking in, and we're seeing those thoughts in people's mind. Which I go back. I think I said it earlier that we've kind of lost the PR battle in the last probably 5 6 years. It's the momentum away from us. It's become like a tide. We can't like King Canute trying to stop the tide coming in. This anti-trans rhetoric is now the discourse is now in the public domain as being acceptable, and we are now seen as being unacceptable. And that's a real shift in the last 5 6 years, isn't it?
I mean, I would go further than that, Joe, if I'm honest. I would say in the last 10 years, it's certainly been more and more visible, and the noise has become very distinguishable. I think, I mean, we don't want to go into the American discussion at this time, but we certainly could go into it. But I think we've seen this whole thing that people are now frightened because society as a whole is changing rapidly at an incredible speed. And because society is changing at an incredible pace, we also need legislation, we need policy, we need process, we need all of those things to keep up with it. And again, forgive me for keeping sound like a repeating record, but the legislation, the policies, the processes haven't kept up to date with the details, despite you and I's best efforts to do what we do in terms of our day jobs, as it were, by going around coaching, developing, and giving speeches, etc., etc. There is still a select few people who are blinkered and don't want to look beyond what is outside normal for them or their own box, as it were.
Mm. So the Supreme Court ruling was 16th of April, 23rd of April, the EHRC published some interim words on their website. Then a couple of weeks later, they published the consultation. And I read the consultation several times and thought, all this sounds like is how to exclude and discriminate against trans people lawfully. There's no balance in the advice being given, is there? I think that's what's causing confusion. Is there seems to be a sex supremacy view of the world. And don't get me wrong, I, as a woman, I do not want any woman to feel less than in my presence. I never will do. I never want to. But the, what we're getting is an unbalance here. We're not getting any advice on how to help organizations who want to do their thing, the right thing by them, for their people, for their customers, for their stakeholders, for whoever it may be they come into contact with. The advice they're getting is very much, you have to push trans people into non-existence.
Again, you're absolutely spot on, and that is the huge disappointment that I have to say from the HRC, because the HRC was always meant to be an advisory board to understand the experiences of the characteristics that the equality legislation is written for. And what it's actually done is try to create a wedge, and it's driven a even deeper wedge between the gender reassignment piece and what is now defined as biological sex. Yes, they are two separate things, but we also have to recognize that with every single characteristic, we all have them. Every single one of them, those characteristics, we have them in some way, shape, or form. And it's the whole thing about those characteristics. They are like a huge Venn diagram. There are places where we will blend. There are things where we have similarities. And what the HRC has tried to do with this interim guidance, as I see it, has just said, you know what, gender reassignment, you're off on your own. See ya. But we need to find a way to bring it back, and possibly even bring in a further one that's about gender expression or gender non-conforming, whatever you want to be able to do, to allow for every single people to feel that they have some sort of right, protection, etc., etc. Because basically that's what equality legislation is. It's about protections.
Mm. I saw something, was it the UK has now been put on a watch list for genocide against trans people. And it sounds very dramatic and very kind of hyperbolistic, sort of like, whoa, we're making these wild statements. We're now genocide against trans people. And I always talk about inclusion as being a feeling. Belonging is a feeling. Do I feel included? Do I feel belonging? And I do feel that people are actively trying to deny my right to even exist. And by curtailing how I can perform in public spaces, means I now have to self-limit myself, or to question myself where I can participate for personal safety, for fear of being discriminated against, abused, harassed, or ridiculed, back to where we were in the 70s here, just for going to the cinema, going to the supermarket and needing to use the toilet, just for whatever it may be. I now feel, whoa, I go to the hospital, I think, oh, if I'm going for a checkup, is there a toilet I can use? Then suddenly I see this big yellow sign that just has the picture of a toilet on it. I go, wow, brilliant. That's a toilet anyone can pee in. I haven't got to decide. But there's this perception now that people want to either push us into a third space, a disabled cubicle, and I do not want to say anything bad about disabled cubicles. They're designed for people with a disability, designed for people who have accessibility needs. They're meant to be clean, tidy, and not a third space for people. They're designed to be credible. I'm not trying to paint them as that. But when you're given a choice between identifying as disabled, using the men's or using the ladies, what you're telling here is you're saying to me, you have to use a space that wasn't set up for you because you don't fit into any other space now. So we don't want a fourth space or a fifth space. We need to make sure the spaces the organisation provide are not labelled as accessible or this. They're just toilets, they're just showers, they're just changing. And whilst I don't want to have the whole conversation again to focus on toilets, these sort of things, because it goes far deeper than that. It's the whole societal belief of who we are. And now we're seen as being fake, not real, biological men, all these labels have been thrown at us, aren't they?
I mean, going back to your point about the feel, hence the reason my business is called Five Senses of Inclusion. What we see, what we hear, even what we taste and what we smell. But ultimately, what do we feel? What are we doing to make us that sense that we feel that sense of belonging? What are we doing to feel that we've got something that every single person feels that they can be a part of the wider society? That's surely what we're wanting to try and achieve, to be able to do. Going back to the toilet, and again, I'm like you, I don't want it to be dominated by the toilet question. But sadly, it's the question that's always been there. I still remember, again, when I told my employers that I was transitioning 40 years ago, that, look, this is what I'm going through. Can you support me? Can you find a way to help me? And they said, well, as long as you use the disabled toilets. And I was like, but I am not disabled. I am not. I may, yes, I have disabilities or impairments that contribute to who I am as a person, but the fact is, I do not have a physical disability. That is why there is a toilet set up, as you say, to allow those people to have a space where they can do what they need to be able to do. I don't need that space. I am a part of the wider society. I have not got the impairments that affect my ability to use those kind of facilities, as it were. That's why they are much bigger, they are much wider in that space. I just simply need a cubicle where I can go and pee, or whichever other one I want to be able to do. But it's very much be able to go there and pee, simply as that.
Yeah, I was at my local cinema over the weekend, and I noticed that the disabled cubicle or the accessible cubicle was out of order. And I can't imagine how frustrating that was or is for a person who required that facility to have that out of order. They did have another one, but it was way down the corridor, around the corner, and down, completely off track, and it wasn't even signposted from the one that was out of order. So if you were in screen 3 or screen 4, you would potentially not have known there was another one around the corner. So I often find that the accessible cubicle, because it's only one room, it's easier when you've got 10 stalls. If one's out, two's out, it doesn't matter. But if the accessible cubicle is out, that really does limit people's ability to function in society. People who have a genuine accessible need for those facilities. So if you put my needs on top of that and other people like me on top of that, we're going to be creating even more demand and pressure on that limited resource. And we'll end up with a queue outside of the accessible toilet in the same way we get a queue outside the ladies' toilet. And if you're using accessible often, you have a need that can't wait. You have a more urgent need, which is why you need that facility. So I never want to be in that toilet, open the door, and there's someone who's standing outside looking like they're so desperate, and I've kept them waiting. How am I going to feel for that? So there's no way that space should be for me. So the challenge now is how do we? Yeah, I think it was either the HRC or the Supreme Court said this. That it's now the employers and the service providers' job to include me under gender reassignment in a way that I feel respected. So it's no longer the government. The government, the law says you're this, you're that. It's now you as the employer to make sure I feel included. That's pushing the burden back onto service providers, isn't it? But employers aren't ready for this. Service providers aren't ready for this. They barely have accessible facility.
You know, when the minister, the Women and Equalities minister, I won't name them, but we all know who I'm talking about. When the Women and Equalities minister made the announcement in Parliament about when they were quizzed about what does this mean, etc., etc., and the pushback kept coming back to more and more organisations have accessible toilets, more and more organisations have gender neutral facilities, etc., etc. I couldn't help but deep down inside myself feeling, hang on a minute, I've worked in those buildings in Whitehall. All of those buildings in Whitehall are grade 1 or grade 2 listed buildings, and to build a facility that caters for people like me is going to take a lot of planning details. What do I do in the interim? What am I going to do in that interim until that has happened on that details? So again, as you say, Joe, pushing it back onto the employers, is absolutely disrespectful. I mean, we've got to take some sort of accountability at all levels. Yes, we, and that includes us, we have to take some accountability, but we also have to be able to get HRC to take up the baton. And at the moment, as you say, both the HRC and government call them the same thing these days, but nobody is taking that accountability. And I think this is where I use what I call my diplomatic skills to be able to say, look, let's go back to where we were when we had this conversation back in the day, to make you understand that this is what it feels like for me. This is why I'm asking the questions I'm asking. Let's really, really get into that conversation so that you understand what it means. In the same way, from a non-binary and fluid perspective, we need that conversation as well to happen. Otherwise, we're going to be constantly in this constant, ever revolving loop that never ever gets a solution.
And that's a neat segue into an initiative we're working on together, isn't it? This is this trans inclusion toolkit we're doing, which we are looking at real personas and real people, real lives, to help employers and service providers see beyond words on a page and actually get that feeling. How does it impact human beings? How does it impact somebody's ability to thrive in an organization in the world? Because we often forget about a person who gender transitioned 20, 30 years ago, got married, maybe adopted children or had surrogate children, and the children have no idea that their parents are trans. The children's birth certificate have mother and father on them potentially, or mother and mother and father and father. So the school has no idea that the parent is trans, and suddenly, are they allowed to compete in the sports day? Can they run as a mum? Yeah, we look at all these crazy things. And you're employed, the employer has absolutely no idea that your sex assigned at birth isn't what it was assigned now. So we're in this situation now where employers either have to start asking for sex assigned at birth on the application form, or can they trust a birth certificate? Can they trust a passport? Can they trust your driving license? Or do they look at you and go, yeah, as we're saying earlier, you don't quite look feminine enough. You've got as you say, your hands are too big. Oh, and then more probing questions have. So how do we determine someone's sex? Is that, and we're saying that's your problem, service provider. That's your problem, employer. Government to say you have to.
This is why, again, when we, particularly around the Equality Act, around the Disability Discrimination Act, the Gender Recognition Act, all of these things were designed to, and again, I know we both hate this word, Joe, but normalize the kind of way we exist in society. Just the fact that we look a certain way, that we have to use a particular piece of equipment to get around or whatever. It was to very much to try and normalize the situation rather than oh, I still remember when I was at school when the first wheelchair users came into my school, and it was that you saw everybody looking around as if to say, why are they here? Why should they be here? We moved the dial. We shifted things to be able to allow us just to, as I say, normalize that. And that's why the legislation existed in the first place, when we created these pieces of legislation individually and as the wider Equality Act, to normalize the conversation. Just make it part of everyday thing. How many times prior to all of this kind of things did people possibly think about it? It was probably in a small number of cases, but nobody really made a big song and dance about it until what we saw that led to the Supreme Court ruling.
And most people I talk to either haven't paid attention, it's not on their radar, they don't give a damn. They've probably got an opinion, but it's not something that keeps them awake at night. They're not thinking about it. It's only because someone's issued a freedom of information request, or someone's written them a letter, or someone's threatened them with action if they don't do something. They're even thinking about it. Most people are going to go, fine. We've been running this business for 30, 40, 50 years. We've employed trans people for ages. No one's ever had a problem. And even if they had, they've never expressed it. And I appreciate the Equality Act is there for the one to listen to that one voice, and maybe they haven't felt empowered to speak up in the past. Maybe they have felt a lack of psychological safety. They have worried about a trans person being in a stall next to them in their toilets. Maybe they have worried about that, not felt free to speak up, and now they do feel empowered, and they should be listened to. We should be listening to all people. But we have manufactured an issue that didn't exist.
We have, and again, I will always look at this from both sides of the debate. How do we allow the pendulum to find its central state? And I think part of the issue is it feels in so many ways that from our perspective, and when I say our, I'm talking about the wider trans umbrella, we've pushed our pendulum further and further to that left to be able to say we need more rights, we need more this. Absolutely, we do. Nobody's denying any of that. But the way we go about it has got to be in a way where we also bring the people over here to be a part of it. Allow them to be curious, allow them to ask the questions without having us point the finger of blame at them. It's certainly the extremes. We know the extremes have got their issues and they've got their fundings and their problems, etc., etc. But you know what? Even with those extremes, Clint Eastwood's got a famous saying that the problem with extremism is they don't realise how close they are to each other. If they were just to pivot 180 degrees and look each other in the eye, they would realise they have more in common than that which divides them. And that's where I think we've got to be honest with ourselves and say, you know what, let's things happen, gently get back to where we need to get to, and then allow that things to go forward. It's why I think the Prime Minister has said what he said and said, you know what, we need to let the dust settle. Because at the moment, there is a lot of anger out there. And that anger is not helping anybody.
No. To quote the EHRC commissioners recently, trans people just need to accept that they've had too much and they need to accept that they're going to have to take less. That is kind of paraphrasing what she said, one of the commissioners. I was watching an interview with Juno Wash at the weekend, the writer and author, and she was saying she doesn't identify or doesn't describe herself as a trans woman. She describes herself as trans. She doesn't need to tack the word woman onto the end in order to be valid in herself. She has found alignment in her mind, her body, her life, and the way she lives. You could argue that she's quite privileged as well. So let's part that. But do we, as trans people, need to accept that we are not male, not female, but we are ourselves, and we have to find alignment between our sense of self and how we look and how society perceives us without necessarily having to be a woman or a man? And I appreciate that's wandering into non-binary territory here, but does that make more sense if we kick off the shackles of the BS, if you like, of social construct?
For me personally, I've always seen this as a process. I've never ever seen trans as an identity. It is certainly a process, and it's something that I have to acknowledge as my lived experience, etc., etc. But for me, and again, for me, very, very personally, it was a process I went through to be the person I am today. I went through a process to be recognized in law, in physicality, and all of those kind of things as female. That's what I went through to be recognized in that process. It was never ever to be recognized as a badge. Yes, I will use it. Yes, I will always do it in a way that allows me to be able to get on, but I will never ever use it as a weapon. And that's where I think my concern is, have we become too much of a have we created too much of a weapon in this space? And we need to be able to recognize that yes, we are what we are, but again, it's that umbrella situation, which is where I'm a little bit lost, if I'm honest with you, Joanne. I don't get it. Why we feel that we have to constantly live in that place, because when we constantly live in that place, the dysphoria keeps on coming back and again and again. Gender dysphoria is what we're diagnosed with. Surely we want to get through to the cure and just live ourselves. That's for me personally. I accept that.
Yeah, and I subscribe to your A to Z model, and because I started at A and I'm going to Z. There are, as you say, there are people who start at Z and go to A. And I don't truly understand anybody who's going the other opposite direction. I don't understand why anybody would want to go from Z to A, and I don't understand why anybody is comfortable staying at M. But that's their choice, and I also accept that some people don't even use the alphabet at all, and they want to go numerical. That's up to
Yeah.
them as well. I don't understand that either, because I'm definitely an A to Z person, and I like you have got on this conveyor belt at the beginning to get off it at the end, and I did hang around at various letters in that alphabet and realised that that wasn't my destination. It was just I was just changing buses, and I just needed to get on somewhere else and keep going, and found a different route round and got my city map app out and worked out where I had to get the next stop. So, yeah, I definitely see it as a destination, and I often use the affirmation "I am" because I can't explain any of this. I'm a deep thinker. I'm an introspective person. I critically analyze most things. I challenge myself, and I'm able to hold multiple different perspectives. And I try and challenge this day in, day out to go, I must be able to solve this equation. I must be able to figure out, is the answer 42 or is it something else? But the only answer I can ever come up with is I am. And that's not an identity thing. It's just a reality thing. I am left-handed. I am slightly neurodiverse. I am slightly this. Uh, I am. And I don't need to try and explain it to me, let alone anybody else.
I think that's a great analogy. Believe me, Joe. I mean, I'm with you 100% on all of that because we are all individuals. The way we live our lives, as you say, as the meaning of life, number 42. I mean, according to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it absolutely is. But I mean, to me, that is the multi-million dollar question. Once we understand that question, will we get the answer and then suddenly go, well, we're not quite there yet. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? As a species, humanity is about exploration, and it's about always finding those different things about ourselves and realizing things. I look back at the 17-year-old me and think that was a scared, shy kid that didn't know what they wanted out of life. These days, like you, I sit here most days when I'm working, etc., whether I'm not doing the kind of presentations or training sessions, I get into deep conversations with myself. I challenge myself. I use various different technologies as well to try and understand, is this my understand? I then debate with that technology, to use an analogy, because we know that there is so much going on. And keep on going back to the point, as a society, we are evolving and we have to acknowledge that. And there are different things about all of us that make us unique and make us people.
So this arc of inclusion that we often talk about where we are now, and we're on that turbulent part of the arc where if you look at the history of humanity, change happens and there's a reset, and then the arc carries on, and we accommodate over time, and how tomorrow's generation pick up the mantra and go forward will be for them to decide. But where we are right now, we are in this pit of despair. I think it's probably whatever the definition is on that arc is. Where are we going from here? What's the realism? There's lots of court cases on both sides, challenges in the European Court, challenges around the world, as you say, on this list now of genocide, we're on this list of we're falling down the ranks in the ILGA ratings of LGBTQ plus worldwide. We're now in the statistic of can we legally change our gender or not? One of those countries doing that, or we're forcing people to be sterilized before we'll recognize it, those kind of things. Does anyone care? Does the government care, do you think?
I think there is a care somewhere, but going back to your analogy of the bell curve, I mean, I often call that bell curve Tuckman's theory of forming, storming, norming, performing, and we are in that. absolute space. We're in that storming stage without a shadow of a doubt. And I think whenever there's a storm, people always go to try and find the nearest shelter. And that shelter takes various different forms. And under that shelter, we will get influenced in some way, shape, or form. And at the moment, I think everybody's trying to look to find who's under what shelter, and that distinct camps. And therefore, echo chambers are created within each of those areas. So, excuse me, what we've got to try and find is how do we invite those people under those different shelters to come to that middle ground, come and have those conversations. And going back to what you said, Joanne, what we want to try and do is realize that there are people who probably be watching this either now live or later on going, yeah, I need to have that conversation. How do I do that in a safe way where I'm not going to be accused, where I'm not going to have the finger pointed at me or blame whatever, in a way that allows me to feel safe? And that's where I invite everybody, that we need to come to that center space. We need to realize that the only way we're going to resolve this in like any kind of conflict is to find where the commonality is. Where are the points where we can agree to disagree without getting to the point of pointing that finger of blame? That's where we've got to realistically get to. Otherwise, again, as I say, we may as well just pack up and go home. I don't want to do that. I want to be going to the point where I'm booting my box at the end of the day and going, one more thing before you close that lid. Let's absolutely make this world a better place.
Yeah, I want to be the vegan who goes into a steak restaurant and finds something on the menu that works for me as well. Yeah, that's what, if I go into a steak restaurant and find the only option is a nut roast or some sort of bean salad, how do I feel? I don't feel valued, thought of, considered. So just after the ruling, I think I messaged some of my old male friends, and one of them messaged me back saying, "I hope you're able to find acceptance." And I was quite insulted by that. That showed no empathy, showed no other thing. But I keep holding that thought in my mind, and I do. We do, everyone needs to find acceptance of where we are. Not saying we shouldn't keep fighting, we shouldn't keep challenging, but I need to accept that whether I like it or not, the law has been clarified. The government isn't going to step in and make a legislative change. Any process of realignment in the way I would like it to be realigned will be a generation, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, if ever. So I've got to now get myself into a position where I am no longer legally recognised as a woman as I was 2 months ago, 3 months ago. I now need to do what the EHRC advised me to do, which is fight service providers, fight the employers, and say, I'm a vegan in a state restaurant. How are you going to look after me without making me feel like an adult? And maybe I'll go. I won't go to the state restaurant anymore because there's a nice vegan restaurant next door where I am welcome as who I am, and that's where I need to hang out. And I think we in our communities need to put our collective power into making sure that we are catered for who we are, and lose some of the who we were. And I don't like that. I don't like capitulating. But I think we have to recognise that our mental health will suffer if we don't find some way of coming together and pushing the pressure on others to help us resolve this.
I mean, I have absolutely no doubt we will find a resolution. No doubt in my mind whatsoever. But the only way we're going to find it is by bringing everybody, and that means everybody, to the table. I know there are voices out there, and we all know them, who are exceptionally hurtful, exceptionally spiteful. But I go back to prior to gender recognition. There were people, politicians, individuals, groups who absolutely fought tooth and nail against the Gender Recognition Act, even the Gender Reassignment Regs of 1999 on the Sex Discrimination Act, who fought so hard But again, there are individuals out there in various different places, in parliamentary life, in social surroundings, who absolutely want to be a part of it. And I think what we as a community have got to recognise, we've tried to fix this ourselves from within. Yes, we should, but we also need those allyships. We also need those people. We also need those people who don't get it to make us understand why it is what we're doing, rather than just saying, right, we're going to change the policy, right, we're going to change this, simply based on the idea that makes us feel good. We need to bring everybody with us.
Yeah, that goes back to the soft sales pitch I was doing a bit earlier when we talked about our inclusion model here. Is what we talk about here is working with government, working with service providers, working with employers to say this is how you can make us feel included and belonging by coming in contact with your organisation as an employee or as a service user or whatever that may be. How can you make us feel? And I often talk about the safari park as a model. Don't put us in a cage where we have limited options. Put us in a safari park where the fences are so broad and wide and we can roam and we don't know where the edges are. We feel free even though we aren't. We don't want to live in the Serengeti to be eaten by a lion at the waterhole. We don't want to live that rogue life. We want to find a place where we belong, we fit, we're safe, and the edges are so broad that we don't bump into. That's what society needs to create for us and people with a disability and people who are pregnant and people who are and that's what the Equality Act is supposed to be doing, creating a society where we live as one with broad fences, no lions, and plenty of waterholes.
It's the TV2 Denmark analogy, as I call it. If people don't know what I'm talking about, go onto YouTube, TV2 Denmark, all that we share. It's a video where you have people in different boxes and realize by asking simple questions such as, who here was the class clown? Who here is lonely? Who here has been bullied? Who here have bullied others? And realizing that we have more in common than what divides us.
That's for sure. I'm looking at YouTube. We've got about 25 people live at the moment. So if you are watching this, do put a comment up. We are here to answer questions as well. Unfortunately, the LinkedIn live stream didn't work for some reason. Technology, hey. And we are also live on Facebook. So if you are watching on Facebook, again, pop something in the comments and they will come in or we will see them. So Jacqui, what else do you want to talk about today?
I think where I also want to take us on is where next? I think that's the point we've got to get to. Where's next? Where do we absolutely go next in terms of things? I think realizing that we could sit here and mope and feel sorry for ourselves and think, oh God, the world's a horrible place. I think we have to look at what is the what next? How do we move beyond where we are today? And for me, that moving beyond where we are today is so important, because we've gone from crisis to crisis to crisis in society. I would go back as far as 2001, and where obviously we've had horrific things happen across the world, from 9/11, 7/7, financial crash, COVID, so many different things, and we just seem to be limping from place to place to place. How do we absolutely, instead of going from those crisis to crisis to crisis, and this, let's be honest, in terms of our lived experiences, may feel like for many is a crisis right now. How do we go beyond that? How do we look beyond that? And I think both you and I in our business models, Joe, we're always trying to think, look, how do we get you to take that next step? How do we get you to be brave? How do we get you to be curious? How do we get you to scrape off the scab of something and find where the solution and get under that kind of details? That to me, I think, is so important, what we need to be able to do right now.
Yeah, I agree. It's whenever I'm having a dark moment, I actually walk out the front door, go about what I'm doing, and the world is still a lovely place. The world is not horrible out there. I think what happens is you become a prisoner in your own mind if you're not careful. And there is hope. There is hope. And I think we can focus on the negatives. We can focus on people who are talking against us. We can talk about the negative rhetoric, the nasty, hateful comments we see from positions, from people in positions who should be taking a more measured line, but they're not. And even elected politicians who are even questioning whether marriage should occur between same-sex couples. And that's what worries me more, is the rise of those popularist views becoming mainstream. And whether we talk about what's being imported from the US coming in over here, that worries me more about where our society is going, becoming a less tolerant, more xenophobic, more insular world. And I think that we are just maybe the first symptom of that. Oh, I can't hear you, Jacqui. Have you've muted yourself somehow?
Sorry about that. I do apologize. They always say that when America ends up with a cold, we end up with the flu or whatever it is, the analogy that people do. And yes, let's not kid ourselves. What's happening over there at the moment is incredibly scary, incredibly frightening for so many different people. But again, I don't believe that we will get to that point. I believe that we have an absolute opportunity here to be able to sit up and be the leader again. And I would love for people out there to be able to get in touch and say, look, these are the key topics that we need to talk about. These are the key things that I want to talk about. These are the things that are frustrating me, keeping me awake at night. And for us to create this movement that we're trying to create, Joe, in terms of this kind of space, to really, really build these kind of conversations that allows people to talk about those kind of things. Again, going back to, forgive me, keep on going back to the analogy around the legislations that we've just been talking about. But I think we need to turn this over to our audience and say, what do you want to talk about? How can we get them involved? What are the key things that they want to be able to have a conversation? And maybe you and I making something that allows and empowers people to be able to do those kind of things as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think talking, communicating, it's one of the key tenets of inclusive leadership and inclusive organisations is that listening phase to understand everyone's concerns. And I think I've listened to a lot of people, a lot of views, a lot of opinions, and I don't agree with all of them, and they clearly don't agree with mine in all respects. But we have to live in a society where we can hold those perspectives in the air together, and share how we feel about things, share what our concerns are. Because I think, as you said 5 minutes ago, there's more that unites us than divides us, and we all actually want the same thing, which is a life where we can succeed and thrive. We have sufficient um, money, sufficient food, sufficient heating, lighting. Our basic needs are met. Our family is happy. We have great times at the weekend. The sun comes out, and our favourite shows on Netflix, whatever it is. We want very similar things. We just have different perspectives on how we get there, and that's what we need to try and come together on. Is how do we achieve that better for society, better for everybody, and talk about people's fears. Why are you scared? Why are you worried?
One of the things I often talk about, and you've heard me do this quite often, Joe, is I talk around visual things. And I mean, you're talking about Netflix and things like that, but one of my favorite films is a film called Life Itself. And every time I watch that film, I cry my eyes out, especially at the ending, because life is fleeting, life is short. And I don't know about anybody else, but I want to learn how to smile again. I want to learn how to laugh again. I want to learn that I can get up in the morning and know that, you know what, the weather may be, well, we've had a fairly good summer so far, touching wood, but the weather may be raining outside or whatever it's doing, but we can still take that next step in front of the other. And I can't remember the phrase at the end of it, but realizing that things happen in life that we have absolutely no control over, none whatsoever, and things will happen. Things sadly happen in so many different ways, and in a minute we can be smiling, and the next minute it could be gone. Take the joy from every single moment that we're on this little bubble and go to that point in that kind of space. And I'm not going to get all holier and now, etc., because that's not me. But how do we absolutely get to the point where we can start to really, really find where is the commonality, where is the things that allows us to exist in this world that we're living in today?
Well said. Well said. That's all we're trying to achieve, and that's the trans agenda, isn't it? That's the disability agenda. That's the pregnancy agenda. Whatever predictor characteristic you hold, that's all we're after as individuals and collective individuals, is to come together and find joy. That's what we want to do.
All of us
We've
are
still
in
got
that space.
20 odd people who are watching the live stream on YouTube. Some of us have just joined. So do ask a question. We're going to wrap up in a minute, but we've got time for a few questions. Just pop it in the chat and they'll come up on our screens here. But do ask. If not, sorry, for whatever reason, the LinkedIn live stream didn't work, but I'm glad you found it eventually. And Jacqui and I have been talking about running a series of these, either starting in mid to late August or into the autumn. Either we haven't worked out whether they're going to be weekly or bi-weekly or monthly or anything, but we will be looking for people who want to come on as guests onto the show and just have conversations, because we've said this time and time again in the last hour. It's about talking, listening, understanding, and we want to have conversation with people with different opinions as well. And let's get them out. Let's talk about them. Let's challenge them. And so if you do want to take part, do reach out either to me on LinkedIn. You can search for me, Joanne Lockwood. Jacqui and Gavin is easy to find as well. Hunt us down. LinkedIn is a good place. And make contact. Here we go. We've got a question. Hey.
Steady now, steady.
Yes. So I won't say the person's name. I'll leave it anonymous. The question is, do we think the EHRC will ultimately come to our rescue, so to speak? So what do you think? Jacqui, what do you think the EHRC is actually going to do for us?
I think the HRC at the moment, let's be honest, is in a bit of a state of flux. It's a bit of a state of transition. Are we going to have new leaders? What's happening in that front? Nobody knows at that moment. And I think at the moment, I think the HRC is still trying to understand everything itself. Will it come to our rescue? I think it will only come to our rescue if we're prepared to negotiate and prepared to listen, prepared to hear what they've got to say, prepared to listen to all sides of this debate. I mean, EHRC in its wisdom has got to be non-partisan, non-biased, non-everything. It's a quango. That's why quangos exist in the first place. And to me, it's not just about our side of the debate. As much as we would love it to be about our side of the debate, we've got to be able to make sure it's about every single person. So that's the way I see it. It's got to be something where we're prepared to listen. And I do find that with the conversations I'm having with many parliamentarians at the moment. You will not get a parliamentarian that will entertain the conversation if you simply come about it from one-sided. If you're prepared to listen, then welcome. So that to me is part of the starting point. What about you, from your perspective?
I watched the Women Equalities Committee interview the chair of the EHRC recently on the live stream, the 2-hour meeting, and I also watched the Women Equalities Committee interview the proposed candidate to take over the chairship the other day. The Women Equalities Committee seemed to be giving that candidate a pretty tough time over their women-only focus. So there's certainly a view that I could tell within the Women Equalities Committee of MPs that there's definitely a bit of a focus on whether it's going to be too female biased with that leadership, and whether the commissions themselves need to be rebalanced. And I think there is a perception from Parliament that it is a bit one-sided at the moment. So whether that's going to make a difference or whether it's going to impact in the short term, no idea. But I've just had clarification of the question. It was about the European Court, the European Court of Human Rights, rather than the EHRC. Sorry, I misread the acronym. So
No problem.
do we think that the Good Law Project or the other initiatives, the Victoria MacLeod initiatives going to the European Court, are going to re-invoke our Article 8 rights of privacy as per the Goodwin case, and like a knight in shining armour force the UK government to do something?
I have no doubt that Julian and Victoria will put down a very, very, very good debate. I have absolutely no doubt in both of those characters. I think both of them are lovely, lovely people and people who absolutely care enormously about this. And in terms of that, I listened to Victoria give a very, very powerful speech when I was a part of the Pride in London Human Rights Forum the other weekend there. And it was such a powerful thing. And she talked about Section 23 of the GRA, where just simply using that piece of the legislation to allow us to be able to be recognised, and allowing the Women and Equalities Minister to simply say, look, based on X, Y, and Z, we can make these kind of things happen. So I think it will go all the way to the European Court of Human Rights, I have no doubt. But like every single thing, Europe itself is not as straightforward as it is to think that they've got everything right. There are challenges within Europe, and of course, we don't know who the judges will be. The judges could be completely different, but I feel hopeful that they will get the case heard. Even if they win, we have to be able to realize that this is not just a case of putting something back in place. You have to win over people, because there will still be people who will be resistant to it. So we've got to make sure that we bring people with us, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I suppose my view is that where we are now is quite brutal and quite, I can use the word despair, loads of other superlatives and acronyms and adjectives. In the short term, I don't think it's going to get hugely better. What do I mean by short term? A year, 2 years, 3 years? I think we've got to find that acceptance. We've got to find that that pushback to service providers, to employers, to make sure that we are the vegan in the state restaurant that is being catered for, to use my analogy there. And then we look to the European Court, if we're still signed up to that in a future government, and or the arc of inclusion, that arc of change coming back in our favour in the medium to long term, 5 to 10 years. But I think we have to find acceptance and fight as our vegan. We have to be the vegan, and let's say vegan state restaurant. We have to fight for our rights and make sure that employers and service providers don't treat us as a third space or a third category. And we have to push back to them. And the service provider also is our parliament and our regulation bodies as well. So we have to push to them and say, okay, you're now no longer putting us in the sex-based box. We are in the GR box. So what are you going to do for us? And we've got to fight, make sure that gender recognition box, as protecting the Equality Act, is fought for, and we understand what our rights are within that, and we hold the rope and push for those rights, and not being treated as a third sex or a third space. And I think that's what we've got to do. So we do have to mobilise. We do have to have our voice, not to compete with others, but to fight our own path.
One of the things that we've heard quite often of late is about how DEI is dead, and I won't name certain individuals who've talked about it in that kind of wording, but I think DEI, certainly from the time when I started in this space nearly 20 years ago to where we are today, has got to evolve. And as part of that process, we made it, again, forgive me for saying this, but we made it about specific boxes and made it a celebration, and call it jazz hands, call it what you will, around those particular characteristics. But I feel we've got to shift it from just being about those boxes I mean, diversity, most people get. There is so much diversity out there. Most people get, I say. Most people get equity, most people get equality. Most people get inclusion. But how do we go back to your point before, Joe, about how do we make that sense of belonging? How do we create that culture where that everybody can come along? Like at Pride in London on Saturday, how do we make sure that it's not just the LGBTQIA plus people marching on the parade, that every single person comes along and be a part of that movement? How do we make it so that whenever there's an issue pertaining around disability? I was recently at Chelmsford railway station and the lift wasn't working, and the only way you can get out of Chelmsford railway station is if you go down the lift. There was an individual who had a disability in a wheelchair and they could not get off at that station and they had to go to the next station and then get a bus or something coming back in the other direction. We need to be the voice for every single person across us, not just thinking about it. If this has an impact on me, I've got to do something about it. No, think much wider. The echo chambers, as I said before, we've seen too much even in our own space, where we create an echo chamber awarding us all because we're great LGBT people. No, we're all pretty damn important. So we need to award ourselves for those kind of things as well.
Fabulous. Couldn't agree more. If you are watching this either live, one of the 16 people still watching live, do drop a comment in. If you're watching this on the catch up on either on YouTube, Facebook, or some clips on TikTok, and you disagree with what we're saying, you want to leave a nasty remark about my deep voice and how crazy I look, and you want to all those normal remarks I get that hateful. If you want to do that, that's absolutely fine. Tell me what you think. If you think I'm crazy to think I'm a woman with a deep voice, tell me that. But don't just tell me what you think in that way. Tell me why you think it. Give me your opinion. Don't just spout hate at me. Give me some depth. Give me something I can work with. I'm a great believer in constructive feedback. Give me some constructive feedback. I'm sure Jacqui would appreciate that as well. But engage in the conversation. Don't just throw bricks and grenades at my window. Just step into the room, sit down, take up a chair. Let's have a conversation about this. What would you do differently? Yeah. How can you open your state restaurant and make me feel valued and you want to take my money, don't you? You want to take my money. How can you do that? How can you make me feel special?
I think you're
Or you just
saying exactly. Go
shut
on,
the
Joe.
door, shut the door and say, actually, meat eaters only. If that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. Absolutely fine. Just tell me that. Put it on a big door on this label on the front of the door. No vegans allowed. If that's what you want. Just put it on the door. Good, Jacqui.
No, I was just going to say that I think this is what we need. Just what you've been summarizing there is for people to come and have that conversation. The best way we move the dial, the best way we allow for the pendulum to find its natural state is for everybody to come to that point of the conversation. All of us to sit at the table. You know what? If we don't agree, that's fine. But let's not be like what we're seeing across the political establishments across the world at the moment and become dictatorial. Become part of a bigger part of the sum. Because once we become part of the bigger part of everything, we can all surely find a way to be able to go through. Again, forgive me for sounding like a history book, but if I go back in the day, there were politicians who did not want to get on to this agenda and understand this agenda whatsoever. But they became some of our biggest allies. They became some of our biggest cheerers. Not from a perspective of waving a flag or whatever or being jazz hands, but absolutely being prepared to be able to say something whenever they heard a conversation or a debate happening in Parliament and say that went against whatever they felt and said, well, hang on a minute, I felt that way 10 years ago, but let me explain to you why. And we need to allow those kind of conversations to happen rather than it just being the same old conversation around the same old people who are so-called representative of a certain group of people. We all represent the one kind of group of people that's important, the human spirit, and that's so important as well.
Yeah, this comment just lit on YouTube. Politically, they leave it to the law to resolve, and I think that's fair. I know people have criticised our Prime Minister's statements recently, but I believe that the Prime Minister's in between a rock and a hard place. He has to be seen to uphold the law as interpreted by the Supreme Court. He has to be seen to uphold the view of the EHRC, the Quango body that is the appointed arbitrator of the Equality Act. If our Prime Minister came out with anything other than 100% support for either of those two bodies, then it would undermine the rule of law, the rule of democracy, and undermine our entire parliament. That's what got us into the Brexit mess, because once you ask the question, you have to listen to the answer. And what you want is the courts or some other body to force your hand to do something about it, which is what happened with the Goodwin case back in the late 90s and early 2000s. So yeah, I think if you're a front bench MP, you're a cabinet minister, you hold a position of authority, you've got a red briefcase, you have to toe the party line, and you have to toe the government line. So you're not going to hear them dissent, whether you like it or not. And I think it must be conflicting to people who are in the past human rights lawyers, you are in the past part of the LGBT community themselves, having to toe this line and be accused of being transphobic, being accused of being anti-trans, whatever the rhetoric is, when deep down they're trying to do the right thing by all people. And it's a real tough gig. And so I don't expect our Prime Minister or any senior member of the government to be saying anything different than they are. But I do expect our MPs who have a free vote, who have a free mind, to engage in these conversations, to listen to these conversations, and to bring the will of Parliament to bring change through that process, and also for us as a community or communities to work with people like the Good Law Project, work with other people going through European Court to provoke change in that way as well.
Your points there are absolutely spot on, Joe, particularly in terms of parliamentarian. We have to remember, particularly the party that holds the keys to that black door in Downing Street has to abide by the ministerial code, the parliamentary code, all of those kind of code this, code whatever. And it takes somebody outside to bring that challenge to allow for things to happen. If I think back to the Gender Recognition Act, it was Alec Carlisle, now Lord Carlisle in the House of Lords, who took that challenge and got the assurance from then when the Labour Party came into power in 1997 to make sure that happened. But it wasn't a case of somebody from within. He had to then make the argument to allow for that debate to happen, because that's what democracy is about, having debate and respectful debate. Yes, I know that our parliament right now feels a little bit like a circus, feels a little bit that nobody's listening to each other. But you know what? It's still a process that it has to go through, where debate happens, where it then goes from the House of Commons to the other place, then back again and back and back again, to allow for democracy to happen. We need that to happen. And just because the Prime Minister may think a certain way, he cannot be seen to be thinking that way. He may say that this is what's on our manifesto. Absolutely, he can. But we also need to realise there is an opposition, and they have a voice, and they have a right to have that voice heard, despite what we may think.
Yeah, and I think again it's incumbent on us as trans, non-binary, gender diverse people or allies who feel they've been marginalised further by this Supreme Court ruling, to use the channels open to us. Go to our MPs, go to our local councillors, go to our local government. If you feel there's an injustice, go to employment tribunals, go challenge people under the Equality Act. If you feel that you have been discriminated against, indirectly or directly, within the protected characteristic of gender reassignment, in the Equality Act, or any other protected characteristic, then use your right, because the Good Law Project, there are other bodies out there that will challenge that. And if you're right, you will win your case, hopefully. Yeah, if we believe in the system, you will be heard. If you do nothing and you do not get counted, then we will never hear your voice. If you experience a hate crime, report it to the police. Step out, be visible, because the only way that people will hear our voice is if they see us speaking, listen to us speaking. To say it's not worth it means all we're doing is giving in. So every time you detect injustice, you have to speak up. Sorry, that was a breaking the fourth wall there. I was speaking to the crowd, not to you, Jacqui.
But again, picking on those points though, Joe, I mean, again, at the moment, whenever we're having those debates, we're right at the coal face. Sometimes you have to go beyond the coal face. Sometimes you need to be strategic and think, right, where is the barrier? It may be about 200 miles beyond the front line, and tackling that kind of cause. Cut off the supply chain, cut off whatever. Find these key points that will allow us to be able to do. And the fact is, at the moment, it seems like we're just doing everything at the coal face, patting each other on the back. Yeah, look how great we are. You know what? We've got our frailties too. That's okay.
There's an ice hockey saying, isn't there? Skate to where the puck is going, not to where the puck is now. So we have to look at where the puck is going, that arc, and we have to start aiming. Yes, we've got to do our fighting now. Yes, we've got to do our defensive work now. Yes, we've got to do what we're doing now. But where's the puck going? How do we get to that point and meet it? And that has to be bringing society on that path as well. We can't meet society when the puck's already over there and we're here. We've got to try and catch up and try and see where society is. We've got to listen to the world and recognize that whether we like it or not, public perception has changed and it's getting more and more negative in certain aspects. And we have to be we can't be our own worst enemy. We've got to be our own best savior, if you like. We've got to
Be our own
exemplify.
best friend. Be our own best friend.
Support each other. Don't chuck each other under a bus. Don't be divisive. But also we have to be realistic. We can't be the angry activist with balaclavas on. We have to be diplomatic as well.
Even when certain journalists are behaving the way they are, and I know you've gone into the lion's den more times than most, Joanne, but even when you have the angry journalist who's trying to provoke you, be the bigger person. We are bigger than that. What's it Michelle Obama says? When they go low, we go high.
Because as we saw from the from Pride in London at the weekend, as we saw from the mass lobby at Parliament the other day, trans people being happy doesn't sell papers, doesn't make headlines. One trans person does something bad, is front page. So we recognise that we're never going to get positive press at the moment. So don't give anyone the excuse to talk about us negatively. That's all I can say is keep doing the positive stuff, even though no one talks about it. Turning up, being the best you can be. That's all I can do. And don't rise to it. Don't snap. It's hard because that will hit the papers. And unfortunately, it's the person that burgles your house isn't guilty if you shoot him with a shotgun. You are. And that's how the law works, unfortunately. Anyway, we're rabbiting on now. It's we've been going an hour and a half. I thought we did pretty well. This is we were overgoing. And we've still got people watching live, which is fantastic. Thank you for joining us. And we've got some comments here. Let's have a look. So we've got last couple of comments to put up. Here's one here. Just want to know that I care and will fight for just and inclusive society. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Another one here. From a public sector perspective, there's a genuine desire to be inclusive, but the implication of the law in the HRC code of practice are making that almost impossible. Yeah, it's well and truly stitched up. And that's the reality. And also, thank you for openness and honesty and calm perspective. You look great, by the way. Hey, that's a win. Thank you, Martin. We'll bank that one. Appreciate it. And thank you to everybody else watching. So it's been a pleasure. And I say we are going to do more of these, and we look forward to people being our guests, joining in. And if you've got perspectives, then yeah, we'd love to hear from you. And if you want to send us questions you want us to tackle, we do it anonymously if you wish. We're happy to. We are literally planning a TV show. It's a TV show, isn't it? Broadcast show.
I think that's a fair reflection.
And we're looking to how to build up that content, how we're going to structure it. And I think a Q&A section, a feature section, a review the paper section, and also a guest section will be on it. So we're going to try and, my dream is to model it on this week, the Andrew Neil show that was on Thursday nights before the politics show. Hopefully we'll try and get it on something like that. So that's the aim. So watch this space, and we'd love you to be involved. Jacqui, as always, you're amazing. Thank you.
And thank you, Joanne. Look forward.
And good luck in the National Diversity Awards. If you're watching this and you can still vote, get in there, leave Jacqui a testimonial. Lifetime award. Lifetime Achiever Award.
Not an old person, or as I call it sometimes, the old FART, but I won't swear live on.
It's a lifetime
Yeah,
achievement to
conversation.
get to the point where you just found your second life. That's what it is.
There you go. See, I like your thinking.
I know. Anyway, bye everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
And
Bye.
I'll just reshare that screen, and that will be our closing window. So see you later. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.